My name's Andrew Hudson. I'll be your host this evening. We will hear from Don for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have about that amount of time for questions and answers and discussion. If you know anything about Don, he loves to engage with people. He will want to know what your thoughts on the material are too. Evolutionary Change is hosting this. Evolutionary Change is an emerging multimedia project and community of practice dedicated to providing support for all those seeking to help bring about a more just and regenerative world in these times of great transition. Don has made this the work of his life. Don has a master's degree in sustainability leadership from Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. He went back to Sarasota, Florida, where he had lived part of his childhood and founded Transition Sarasota, which continues to be one of the leading transition initiatives in the world in this global transition movement, where we are working in local groups to respond to the great transitions the world is going through. Don will undoubtedly be drawing on material from his recent book, The Regeneration Handbook, which is very influential in the transition movement, and his current paid work is with Transition Networks, a global network that supports transition initiatives, where he is the training coordinator. So again, we will hear from Don for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A. You're welcome to share questions in the chat. You're welcome to message those to me. I'll curate them, and we'll have some discussion after we hear from Don. Take it away, Don.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for being here, introducing. For those of you who don't know, Andrew is currently, I believe, program director of Community Harvest SRQ, which is the current name for Transition Sarasota, doing a wonderful job with it. Also, one of my greatest friends in the world. So nice to be here with you. And nice to be here with all of you. I'm going to give a little presentation here and, sharing some of my kind of latest thoughts about where this movement for regenerative communities is headed, why it's needed, how you can help, and how we can win. The title kind of kept growing as I was developing this presentation. It started out with just how you can help, but then I think we need some real inspiration in these times. We need some real credible hope in these times. So how we can win, and then why it's needed. Because there's so much right now, as we know, competing for our attention all the time. And, we can't start talking about why this is needed without addressing the elephant in the room. Yeah, this guy takes up a lot of headspace. If you know the term energy vampire, Donald Trump might be the greatest energy vampire in all of human history. Having to constantly think about this guy because of all the things that him and his administration are doing. And you probably know all this already, but sending the US military in to police mostly African American cities, making comments about Chicago is going to know why it's now called the Department of War, empowering mass ICE agents to grab people off the streets and disappear them. Sometimes these are unaccompanied minors in the dead of night. Sometimes they're sent to torture prisons in countries they have no connection to. purging the government of everyone who doesn't completely support his agenda, um, meaning that people that we depend upon to tell us the truth about things like the state of the economy and our health, science, the climate are getting removed, and loyalists are being put in place who will deliver whatever message uh, he wants them to say. Dismantling the social safety net while cutting taxes for the rich, reversing progress on social justice and climate change, even canceling these large renewable energy projects that are almost completed just out of spite, supporting ethnic cleansing in Gaza, rolling out the red carpet for war criminals like Vladimir Putin, making billions and billions of dollars off the presidency. And then who knows? He likes to keep us on our toes. Maybe we'll invade Greenland and or Canada. Um, I myself have my doubts about Canada, but a lot of this stuff is very serious. It would be nice to be able to look away, but this kind of authoritarian push and takeover of the government is very, very serious. And so I don't think that we can depend on, the judges and the lawyers, even though some are doing some very heroic work right now to uphold the rule of law. We can't depend upon that. We need to get out in the streets. We need to raise our voices whenever we have the chance and not be intimidated by the kind of culture of fear that's being created in this country. We can't, preemptively surrender. But I think we also need to be able to zoom out and see the bigger picture, because it's easy to get kind of drawn into this myopic space where we're just reacting to the latest outrage. And there's more that's happening on our planet right now than Donald Trump, as we know. We live at an extraordinary, unprecedented moment in human history. Homo sapiens have been around for about 300,000 years. But within the last 500 years, within the last 260 years since the fossil-fueled industrial revolution, the past 70 years of globalization, advanced technology and the internet, we've created a world that our ancestors would not recognize. We're in a completely different situation than humanity has ever been in. And I think it's, could be safely characterized. I'm going to make a lot of overgeneralizations tonight, but safely characterized as a period of exponential growth. Exponential growth in human population, exponential growth in consumption of natural resources, exponential growth in the use of energy. And, this very unusual period in human history has gifted us some wonderful things, global communications technology, the ability to travel farther and faster than ever before, for a lot of people, a higher standard of living that could ever have been expected in times past. But more and more as we go on, we're starting to experience the negative side effects and uh, often unintended consequences of this push for domination of the world, controlling nature, and bending it to our will. And a new paradigm is necessary. We cannot continue in this way much longer. Whether we're talking about, 5 years or 10 years, we're talking a blink of an eye in historical time. And we need to be addressing this as well. We can't lose sight of it just because of what's happening in our present. So I think to address this kind of larger context that we're dealing with, we have what we might call conventional activism, still very important. But there's this kind of new activism that's arising in this time, if anything can be said to be new under the sun, that we might call regenerative activism. Different kind of activism for a different set of problems. And what it looks like many different things, where conventional activism oftentimes is kind of a monolithic, get as many, 100,000, million people out in the streets, all shouting the same message. This kind of activism is more diverse, more creative, kind of a mosaic of different types of approaches that I think is fit for the kinds of challenges that we're facing. So, we need opportunities to come together and talk about these things to begin with, and to begin to share ideas and resources and start to build community, and to sense what we could do to really make a difference. We need an activism that engages all aspects of its local community, whether that's government, business, education, nonprofit sector, ordinary individuals from all walks of life, to co-create a new vision for our communities that will see us through to the other side of this great transition. And we need to do lots of practical projects. We need to create systemic alternatives to the status quo and make them widely available and very visible so people can see them and experience them and come to love and trust them. These are things like supporting regenerative agriculture, encouraging urban farming and teaching all sorts of skills related to food production and self-sufficiency, fostering resilient local and regional food systems, and giving birth to worker-owned businesses. Expanding renewable energy, yes, of course, definitely, but particularly renewable energy that is rooted in and owned by local communities, so that we're not subject to large corporations for our very survival. Local currencies, supporting local independent businesses, community-led redevelopment, intentional communities, Um, and probably most importantly, weaving all of these kinds of things together into a future that we work together to implement. And many other things besides are part of what I'm calling the movement for regenerative communities. And it's based on a very different approach to organizing than the conventional activism that most of us are used to. Um, and I think that's a good thing. Um, and I don't think that means that one is better than the other. I think that these are very complementary to each other, kind of a yin and yang situation. And so I'm going to kind of lay out what some of the differences are here, acknowledging up front that this is an oversimplification. Not in every case. As we say, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Um, but these are some tendencies here. So conventional activism, oftentimes single issue. And that's often how you can make a real change by focusing on one thing that you want to move the goalposts on and continuing to focus on that one issue. But that can also lead to a kind of blindness to the interconnection with all these other different types of issues. So regenerative activism tends to be very holistic, um, looking at all the different issues that are involved and trying to find solutions that sit in that sweet spot where all of these issues can be addressed together. Conventional activism tends to be focused on the present, what's happening right now, whereas regenerative activism looking at the future and kind of larger trends that are shaping our world and kind of shaping that trajectory, that long arc of justice, as Martin Luther King Jr. said. Conventional activism tends to be motivated by fear and outrage, which I am not knocking here. There are things to be afraid of, and there are things to be outraged about. But I think it's also important that we can find work in the world that is driven by hope and possibility. I don't think we can stay in that space of fear and outrage all the time. It simply burns us out. Conventional activism tends to be responsive, responding to something that's happening right now. That sometimes limits its approach, its options. Whereas regenerative activism can be more creative and imaginative. Conventional activism is often focused on fighting the bad, not exclusively, but most of the time. Whereas regenerative activism is building the good, which we also need. And then conventional activism, because of all these things, tends to be top down, in that there's some kind of plan that's formulated and then everybody just follows it. Whereas regenerative activism, by necessity, is bottom up. That it grows out of the specific needs and interests and opportunities inherent in local communities, but has the potential to reach far beyond that as these communities create models that others can adopt and spread ideas that can be influential. So we have these two kinds of activism, and I think they very much represent different paradigms. Conventional activism, because it's working to reform the system, sort of has to adopt the dominant paradigm of force, brute force. Who can yell louder? Um, who can find leverage? Whereas regenerative activism, where conventional activism is very much based on the paradigm of the machine that dominates our society, regenerative activism is based on the paradigm of nature and nature's ways, which, nature thrives on diversity and interconnection and resilience. And so why does this matter? Why is this worth looking into regenerative activism and paying attention to this, especially in this time when there's so much that needs to be done? First reason is we need an inspiring vision for the future we can work towards, not just for our own morale, which I think is important, but because there is such a dearth of hope these days. We don't see any kind of credible alternative to business as usual. Before the last US election, vast majority of Americans reported feeling the country is going in the wrong direction. Now, everybody might have different explanations for that, depending where you sit on the political spectrum. But almost everybody agrees things are not going well. And I think that leads to the rise of people like Donald Trump. He was the change candidate. At least people knew it wouldn't be more of the same. Whereas I think Kamala Harris represented the status quo. And I think that's a big, big part of the reason why the last election went the way that it did. So we need something for people to believe in, to work towards, not just a criticism or critique of what is. And we need lots of credible, desirable alternatives to the status quo, practical, real life embodiments of this vision in as many places as possible, at as large a scale as possible, so that people can believe in this vision. Otherwise, it's very easily dismissed as just some kind of progressive pipe dream. We need to show that this is really working, that it can take care of people, that it can put roofs over people's heads, money in people's pockets, and food on their tables. And we need to play both defense and offense. I'm not very typically fond of sports metaphors, but I think this one works. If you're always playing defense, you are always going to lose. So regeneration is, in a way, a good offense for creating a better world. So that's some of why this is needed. Um, how can you help? A number of different ways we could talk about this. There's so many different things that can be done. Um, Here I'm going to use what I'm calling the zones of influence. If you've read the Regeneration Handbook, it's referred to as the zones of evolutionary change, um, which, yeah, that still works, but trying to strip some of the jargon out here. These are zones of influence. Um, and thinking of zones of influence, where we have the most influence, where to start and where to go after. Um, Naturally, start with ourselves and with our everyday surroundings, our homes, families, our friends, our workplaces, our schools. Um, and I think it's really important to start here if we haven't already, which I think most of us probably have. Because when we do, we learn a lot about change. We also become, we need to do this work on ourselves and our immediate life to not be hypocrites in trying to create larger change. But we also learn a lot about change by trying to change ourselves and change our immediate lives. That can be humbling, that can be helpful, that can be insightful when we go and try to have influence on a larger scale. So what we could do here, many, many more things that could be listed. Here's just some of my greatest hits. Cultivate inner resilience. Um, we need to, in some ways, uh, get our own life in order before we can create change in the wider world. Um, if we're constantly beset by dramas in our personal life, it can really be hard to have anything left over to offer other people. So, um, yeah, we need to work on ourselves. We need to uh, look into our shadow. We need to um, transform and become the kind of people that can really help others. Permaculture your home. It's like pimp my ride, permaculture my home. But yeah, to learn how to grow some of your own food, put in fruit trees where you can. If you can afford solar PV, solar hot water to do that. Before that, to do the work of energy efficiency, that's often even more rewarding and less costly. To look at your water, to catch rainwater and use that to recycle some of the water that you use through gray water systems, um, to compost to reduce one's waste. All these things are very important and they do add up and they influence others. Also building community, whether that's with our neighbors through, getting to know them, exchanging emergency contacts, having potlucks, doing block parties, um, maybe starting or joining an intentional community, a co-op or a co-housing community. Um, and learning how to share food and share labor and make decisions together and um, resolve conflicts nonviolently. All these things really important skills for the future we're trying to create. Reduce excess consumption. This is pretty straightforward, but you know, trying to drive less, take public transit, bike, walk when you can, um, fly less for in those situations where you can decide not to take that trip. Maybe explore your own backyard a little bit more. Volunteer with a local group that's doing this kind of work. And I think that's a great way to start getting involved in this kind of thing, to volunteer with a number of different organizations. See what you like and see what you don't like, what you're drawn to. Run for office. A bold move, but we need it. We need people with this kind of consciousness going into politics, um, and starting at the local level and building up from there. You can work on transforming your workplace to be more regenerative, whether that's creating a more regenerative culture, um, you know, leading sustainability initiatives, or even transforming the kind of aim of the business. Quit your job, um, especially if you're working in something that runs contrary to regeneration. No, not everybody can do this, but it could be a very liberating thing. These are not times to be risk averse, I think. We need to, if we want a better world, we need to chase after it. Um, and this can involve things like getting out of a bad relationship, anything that's kind of no longer serving. Start a business, a social enterprise, something that provides livelihood, as well as creating some good in the world. If you have money in investments, divesting from the most harmful businesses, divesting from Wall Street altogether, and maybe investing in local businesses and organizations that are generating wealth in your community, sometimes in other ways than purely monetary. I think it's prudent to prepare for the worst, um, to have some kind of emergency and disaster plans, to some result. We don't need to build underground bunkers, stock up on guns and gold necessarily, but to be aware that these disasters are occurring more and more frequently. And then helping spread the word is a huge, huge one. Um, more people that are talking about this, the more that it's going to spread. All right, so that's some of the things you can do on the kind of individual household level. What about community? We know we need to come together, to work together, to change systems and culture, and create a new way. So I like to use the 5 stages of transition. There are different models of how to do community organizing. This one I particularly like for a few reasons. One, because I know it very well from 17 years of working with the transition towns movement, out of which this model came. Um, I find it to be particularly accessible, that you can start just right where you are, even if you don't have any money, you don't have a huge following, you don't have political clout. You can start a group, you can bring people together, and you can gradually scale up your impact over time. And I also really like this model because I think it works. It's something that I've tested myself and that we see lots of examples from all over the world of this process. So it starts with starting out, uh, appropriately enough. Uh, Starting out is about gathering together a small team of collaborators. Nobody can do this alone. Starting to put on events for the community, maybe educational events and workshops that introduce some of these ideas, get people on the same page, get them talking about, what this means to them, what they think, what some solutions might be, what kind of skills they have to give, and begin to build a robust enough base of support to get your initiative off the ground. Um, and with Transition Sarasota, um, we did a lot of this, particularly in the first year, something that always continues. But I think the first year did 100 different types of community events, from film screenings and book studies to discussions to what we call reskilling workshops to um, uh, many other kinds of events, and saw what people responded to, what they didn't, where they wanted to go deeper, and followed really the energy and the momentum of the community that was showing up, that was interested in wanting to get involved. But eventually we have to go beyond that. Can't just sit around talking about this stuff till Armageddon comes. We need to take practical action. We need to prove that our ideas can actually work in reality. And that's a lot of what the deepening stage is about. It's about taking all that feedback and input we got from the starting out stage and focusing on somewhere where we can make a difference. And for Transition Sarasota, this was the Suncoast Gleaning Project. This was our first major project, still going on today. Over 500,000 pounds of local produce donated to local food banks and the food insecure in our community. And just a wonderful project on many different levels, built a lot of community among people working together, um, built a lot of relationships throughout the local food system, but possibly most importantly, proved that we weren't just all talk. Um, so, once we started donating tens of thousands of pounds of produce, we started getting articles in the media, people wanting to interview us on the radio, and people started to see, oh, there's something real going on here. These people are really serious about making change. So that proving of that our ideas can work in practice, that we can do excellent work and make a real difference in our communities, opens the door to connecting. And for Transition Sarasota in the connecting stage, we started to function more and more as a kind of focal point for the development of our local food shed. We started an Eat Local Week, would annually bring together a couple dozen partners, um, to put on a couple dozen different kinds of events celebrating the best of local food and farming in our area. And this got universities involved, it got funders involved, it got the media involved, it got our local government, as you can see here, involved, and started to really raise this issue in the public consciousness. But we were only able to do that because we were able to connect broadly with our community because we had earned credibility and trust from these other organizations. We also started an e-local resource guide and directory. Both of these projects are still going on to map our local food system and show its growth over time. And partly because of these efforts, of course, not entirely, but over a 5-year period from 2011 to 2016, the number of businesses and organizations working in our local food system in Sarasota about tripled from 87 to 265. There's building a real sense of momentum here around local food. So I actually stepped down as executive director of Transition Sarasota in 2016. So that's kind of where my transition story lets off. We had started doing some kind of building projects, particularly working with the International Slow Money Network to direct investment into local food enterprises. So I'd say we're on the cusp of building, but we didn't quite get there during my time. But lots of other transition groups and other kinds of groups around the world have gotten to this stage where we're starting to do the really big things that are going to, make a real impact on that community's trajectory and show that big change is still possible. So just a few examples of that. This is the Victory Garden Initiative from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which was spun off of Transition Milwaukee early on. This group started transforming people's lawns into edible gardens. And they've been doing this for a number of years. They've now planted over 5,000 edible gardens throughout the city of Milwaukee, which is truly impressive, and have created a Victory Garden urban farm, a teaching farm, and many other ripples off of this project as well. In Liège in Belgium, they started a project called the Liège Food Belt that is now given birth to 15 worker-owned food businesses. Started to weave together a network of these local food businesses in their area and attract government support for this. They're often bringing in millions of euros in investment to strengthen their local food shed. A lot of transition initiatives, establishing community-owned renewable energy companies, where the investment comes from local people putting in a few $100s or a few $1,000s, and that infrastructure is then owned by the community instead of some big energy conglomerate, and it can be used to do things like pay back the shareholders, lower energy prices of low-income residents, or roll that money back in to be reinvested to create more projects. The largest of these, Bath and Community Energy, has raised over 22 million pounds and done 34 different renewable energy projects in their community. There's the Brixton pound and other local currencies. I love to show this one because they put a picture of David Bowie on the 10-pound note, celebrating one of their local heroes. But this is something that's been done in many, many communities worldwide and is used to keep wealth circulating locally because these currencies can only be spent at local independent businesses. They can't be siphoned off by chain stores back to corporate headquarters to enrich executives and exacerbate inequality. Um, and a real symbol of kind of community pride and investment in one's local economy. And some of these are quite big. The Bristol pound got up to 800,000 pounds in circulation, 280 businesses accepting it. You could get it at ATMs, you could use it to pay your taxes, and you could do a pay by text even. This is an initiative in Totnes, England, where the transition movement began, called Atmos Totnes. And here they took this derelict dairy factory in the center of town that is a massive eyesore, and they rallied the whole community around it, and they put together a plan that involved, let's see, 62 affordable housing units, 37 retirement homes, a 58-bed eco hotel, an arts and music venue, health and wellness center, 76,000 square feet of workspace, a local foods cafe, all owned by the community and powered by 100% renewable energy. Now, there have been some political struggles and some backroom deals that have prevented them from realizing this project as of yet, but I think it's a great example of a community coming together to take their power back from the big developers who really don't care about quality of life or what the community as a whole wants. They just care about making as much money as possible. But we can take that power back. And then the last example here is from Ungersheim in France, Ungersheim village in transition. And here they kind of put together all these different pieces that you've been hearing about. The mayor watched one of the early documentaries about the transition movement and got his whole government behind it. They published a 21-point plan. And since then, they've become a fair trade town. They banned pesticides and herbicides. They shut down a nearby nuclear power plant, launched a local currency called the radish, created an atlas of biodiversity, converted a former mining site into a nature preserve and park, switched to 100% organic school meals. They have the largest solar farm in the area, providing more than 5 times as much energy as the town uses, so they can export it to other communities. And they've made public lands and facilities available for an eco village, a 20-acre organic farm, and 2 communal kitchens. So I share all these examples just to kind of enlarge our sense of possibility, hopefully, about what, as Margaret Mead said, a few concerned citizens coming together can do. I think that quote is sometimes seen as a cliche, but it's really true. Groups like this are what change the world. They show new possibilities and give people new hope. But one community, no matter how inspirational, impactful, uh, isn't going to change the world. So I think the fifth stage about of the five stages of transition, as I see it, is about that. How do we start to make a real difference at national and international levels? And the way we do that is by creating networks. You know, it's not necessarily by getting everybody under the same umbrella, but it's about connecting the dots between all these activities, between all these success stories, these points of light. Um, and, you know, the Transition Network's been going for about 20 years, about 1,000 groups worldwide in 70 countries. Not bad. But Transition Network is only one small part of a much larger movement of movements um, that includes hundreds of thousands of different groups around the world. In his book, Blessed Unrest, the American environmentalist Paul Hawken talked about this as the largest movement in the history of humankind. But we don't see it because it doesn't have a single title. It doesn't have a single charismatic leader. It's kind of under the radar. Um, and in some ways, that's how it should be. But in some ways, that needs to change in a big way. So I have this thing getting towards the end of my book that I call the two imperatives. These are, I think, the two things that um, really need to be done in order to um, put the regenerative vision out there as an option for how we go forward in the wake of the decline of the industrial growth society. So the first one is we need to make this vision known. Very few people are even aware of these kinds of things, or even these discussions that are or this larger context that I pointed to earlier.
Hey Google, turn on tower lights.
Just gonna mute. Um, so we need to be talking about this and spreading the word about it, celebrating it everywhere we can, so that people know that there's something hopeful out there, especially in a very, you know, disorienting and dark time. And as I said before, we need to develop successful, practical alternatives to the status quo in as many places as possible. Because otherwise, people will say, nice idea, but it will never work. The fact is, it's already working in lots of places all over the world. But we need more of them. We need bigger ones, and we need to be able to tell those stories and connect the dots for people to really make this something that, you know, is talked about in the mainstream media, that's debated by politicians, that's you know, talked about at workplaces, over the dinner table, at cafes, and so forth. So coming to the end here, you know, I think we are very much at a fork in the road for human civilization, possibly the fate of the planet for the foreseeable future. And of course, we could keep heading down the same road. Use David Foster Wallace's term, the uninhabitable earth, because that's where we're headed if we keep going down this path. But if we're able to do those two imperatives, to spread the vision and back it up with real life examples of these alternative systems working, then maybe as the industrial growth system falls apart and more people begin searching for some alternative, some real hope, we might just be enough to steer people, to steer the future of humanity towards this vision of regenerative communities. And last thing I'll say before we get into the discussion and questions, of course, I went on a little longer than I had hoped to, uh, is I use the picture of mushrooms for this event in the advertising of this event. Mushrooms growing on a dead tree. Somebody wrote to me and said, "Well, you might want to call this something about mycelium instead. You might want to use the mycelium theme." And I like the mycelium theme. This idea that we're creating these, vast underground networks of connection that are unseen but are still very powerful. But I think we also need to go beyond that, because that's somewhat resigning ourselves to this invisible place. I think a time is coming, and it may be soon, that we're going to need to break through the surface and really show ourselves, to show this movement, to show this vision, to show all the things that are working, and to dare to enter those big conversations about the future of our world. So I'll stop there. And let's have some discussion.
Very good. Thank you, Don. Always inspiring to hear you lay out a lot of concrete things that different groups are doing. We had a question in the chat about, examples in the course of your talking. You gave an abundance of them, but also the 5-step process and some other things that let us place ourselves on a timeline, and so we don't just get lost in whatever we're currently doing.
Mm.
And so I just wanted to throw out a question, and I'll keep collecting questions from people. But it would be real easy to sit at home and be overwhelmed by all these different examples from around the world. It just seems like a lot of stuff, even to me, who's been exposed to this for a long time. Can you give an example and just sort of spell out if somebody's sitting at home and they've got some connections with people, but they're not really sure how to get started? You just talk about either Transition Sarasota or somewhere else where you've seen people get started and how they both have the mycelium underground growing and maybe a few mushrooms popping up to have some encouragement and show something. Just talk about the
Yeah.
beginning process.
Yeah. Well, I think in the very beginning, you can start pretty simply, just looking to connect with some like-minded people who also, are aware of these things, who want to at least start a conversation about these things where they live. And then I think, doing educational events, somewhat like kind of raising a flag. You put the flag up there so that everybody can see it, and those that are drawn by it know where to find you. So you start bringing people together in that way. And then, I think it's a very organic process that then, you're sharing information, you're having conversations about these things. And eventually, you'll start to hear, well, why don't we Why don't we try this? Why don't we do that? And to let that take the lead instead of, there's no one size fits all here because every community is different. Um, and very important, especially at the beginning when maybe we don't have a lot of resources, we don't have any kind of recognition or reputation or anything like that, to really work with what people's interests are, the interests and the passions of the people who are showing up. But other, kind of early stage initiatives could be, offering these reskilling workshops that I mentioned, often in local communities. There are lots of people who, somebody's an expert on grafting and pruning fruit trees. Somebody else is an expert on keeping chickens. Somebody else is an expert on biodynamic farming. Somebody else is an amazing bike mechanic. Somebody else, can teach people yoga. Uh, and, oftentimes those people love to share their skills. They, they're like, why are people not asking me to do this? And so, you can lift them up and kind of give them a platform by inviting them to come and teach a workshop, or somebody from another local group that's doing some amazing stuff, come and host a talk with them, shine a light on what they're doing and create some goodwill that we're not in competition here. We're about working together for the greater good. And then, things like repair cafes. That's probably one of the most popular things in the transition movement right now. Simply getting a space, maybe once a month, where people can bring in their broken stuff, whether it be electronics or clothes or bicycles or uh, appliances, whatever, um, and bringing those people who need stuff fixed together with people who know how to fix stuff. And for the people whose stuff getting fixed are actually learning how to do it from those fixers, is just a very simple thing, but very beautiful, very powerful, builds community. It has so many different auxiliary benefits to it rather than just keeping stuff out of the landfill, even though that's important too. So I'll stop there.
Okay. And I just want to remind people, please send in questions and I'll read them. There are a couple things that have come in that have political overtones, and I noticed that you also didn't shy away, even though the transition movement is technically apolitical, but you didn't shy away from referring to one unqualified politician earlier in your talk. Um, so John Duvall had a couple things he dropped in the chat. So our greatest challenge is our great challenge is political polarization. How can we move beyond it? And I think you've spoken a little bit to that. But I'll just combine this with his other question. Soft secession is a big topic now. I know on the West Coast that's true. Um, there's some of these political movements that have a lot of transition overtones to them. Um, can you speak to sort of working within and adjacent to? Because I know that that's not exactly what the transition movement's trying to be. Anyway, can you talk about, there's some pretty heavy political realities that we have to deal with that definitely impact this.
Yeah, I'm not definitely not an expert on secession movements, so I'm probably gonna steer clear of that one, other than to say that, they always say, in our federal system that states are the laboratories of democracy. And I think that's even more true of local communities, municipalities, cities, and towns. It's where experiments in different ways of doing things can get started and spread from there. So I think we should be trying a lot of different things. That's how evolution works, right? So tries a lot of different things. Most of them don't work. Maybe something does. And then that, really takes off. Um, in terms of polarization, yeah, it's a big issue. Um, Transition movement is, largely, I would say, nonpartisan. I would say not necessarily non-political. It's inherently political work, but not wanting to get kind of caught in a lot of the political binaries and pigeonholes that so much of our discourse gets trapped in, and it doesn't go anywhere. So I think in some ways, getting outside that box. And I think, transition, the wider regenerative communities movement do in a lot of ways. Um, you know, Local sustainable agriculture is not really a conservative or a liberal thing. There's definitely a lot to love in there if you're a liberal about sustainability, maybe greater social justice, community connection. But, the values of self-reliance and hard work and neighborliness and being good stewards of the earth, those are at least nominally important conservative values. And so I think, things like local economy, local energy, local food, those are places where we can kind of disrupt the uh, conventional political narratives and come together to build a better future for our community. Now, I think what's happening at the federal government level right now with this increase towards authoritarianism is so serious that it almost transcends politics. I mean, as Americans, we're very proud of fighting the fascists during World War II. I think eventually a lot of people are going to come around to that this wasn't just about Republicans versus Democrats. This is about a truly dangerous person finding their way into political power, um, and that needed to be stopped by the vast majority. That's my take anyway, not an official statement position.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to need to move on and let you make a couple announcements, Don, so that we can end on time. And then I know, Don, you're planning on sticking around after time, so we don't have to cut off at 10. Or at, I'm sorry, whatever time it is, Mountain Time. Um, we don't have to cut off right at time, but I do want to make sure you get the announcements in now so that if anybody needs to drop off, they hear it. So. Could you just do that and then we'll keep going? Anybody who wants to stick around.
Okay, yeah, so just a few things. So this webinar was scheduled as a sort of preview for this workshop that's coming up in Boulder at Naropa University at the end of this month, Saturday, September 27th, uh, Sunday, September 28th. And it's a 2-day workshop based on my book. I'm working with a youth climate justice group here in Boulder called Climatique, and very honored to be working with the Joanna Macy Center for Resilience and Regeneration at Naropa University. As we know, Joanna passed away recently, and one of my biggest heroes, she rose. Um, So that's going on if you're in the area, or even if you're not and you'd like to come. There's still spaces available for this. I think it's going to be a wonderful weekend, kind of diving deep into more of the practicalities of this work. This was kind of the big overarching message. But yeah, we're going to be focusing on what are called the 7 essential ingredients of transition. Some more on our context and vision, but also the inner transition, healthy groups, community engagement, practical projects, and being part of a wider movement. Lots of discussions and activities in addition to some short presentations. So I'll put the link in the chat for that in just a minute. And if you want to continue to follow my work and be part of some of these discussions, you can go to the New Society Publishers website to pick up a copy of my book. There's Transition Network International, which is the support organization for the global transition towns movement. Lots of amazing things there. Yeah, free webinars and podcasts and resources and trainings and all sorts of things, a map of all the transition initiatives around the world. And then my personal website is evolutionarychange.org. If you registered for the event, I'll add you to the newsletter. You can always unsubscribe if you want, but trying to bring some good, thoughtful content there and some useful resources for everybody.